All right. Good morning, everyone. We may have some more folks joining, but let's go ahead and get started to respect your time. Thank you for making this meeting. We have a few updates, and then we'll open it up for discussion as usual. I'm Stephanie Dorkman from Feeding Wisconsin. Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself?
That's me. It was Cap and Madison.
Thanks for being here, Jonathan. So I'll go ahead and share some updates on food share and some other nutrition benefits, and then I'll hand it over to Jonathan for some TEFAP food flow updates on his end. And then I do have an update from some questions that we had from previous meetings that I received from Jennifer Putzer at DHS that I will share out a response from. So just quickly on food share, well, overarchingly, the public health emergency order, as that nothing has changed since our last meeting. The public health emergency will currently exist through at least mid-October. The next major milestone for us to be watching is August 16th. That's the date in which the federal government has to inform states that's within 60 days of the end of the next public health emergency if there's going to be an end to the order. So that's a date we're watching to understand if it will be extended, and if not, to begin really communicating out the unwinding efforts, just letting folks know how that might change their current benefits and other of the kind of final enhanced benefits that still are retained with that public health emergency. So this month in July, folks receiving food share benefits will receive that emergency allotment on their card this coming weekend. That's on July 16th. On the pandemic EBT front, the regular school age pandemic EBT, that portal is closing as of a couple days ago. So school EBT from the 2021-2022 school year is wrapping up. The last issuance of benefits for school EBT will be on July 23rd, and that will cover the remaining benefits for families with school-age kids for May and June of any days that they might be eligible to receive benefits because of missed school due to COVID, school closures or quarantine times. There's also the pre-6 pandemic EBT. There was just an issuance for that program on July 9th for all benefits September through June of the last year, September 2021 through June of 2022. DHS issued over $26 million to just under 80,000 households. So I think the overarching reason why I share that out on this call is that you may see an ebb and flow of families coming through your pantry based on those other benefits. The pandemic EBT benefit is much smaller than it was back in 2020. Students are missing far less school than they had been that year. But those dates of July 6th with pre-6 pandemic EBT, July 16th for the emergency allotments of any any individuals, families receiving food share benefits, and then the school age pandemic EBT dropping on July 23rd is kind of a back-to-back drop of some additional benefits that you may have impact your pantry lines. So those are the updates that I have for you. Oh, and then there's summer pandemic EBT. DHS is working on their plan to issue benefits for summer, and those will be dropped in August and October of this year. So those benefits will not hit families' Quest cards until later this summer. So now I'll hand it over to Jonathan for TEFAP food flow data update, and I will try to share my screen to show a visual that Jonathan has prepared.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I hear you.
Good. So we we have been able to place the food orders for the final quarter. These are shipments that would arrive in Madison in, through the October through December period. So I think I mentioned on an earlier call our entitlement monies for the calendar year 2022 were about 17% less than we had expected, which meant that we potentially would have to order fewer foods into the final quarter of the year. Those foods, by the way, are going out to counties, with the exception of Milwaukee, are going out to counties from December through February. There's about a 2-month delay from when we order to when they arrive in the counties. And currently, TEFAP is accounting for about 45% of our volume. It fluctuates, quite a bit based on other resources that the federal government is making available to TEFAP, but currently just a little bit under half, which translates 17% loss. And entitlement is translates to around an 8% less sort of capacity to buy food or acquire food than we had expected to have. And that's happening at a time when we might begin to see increases in local pantry demand. You all are in a better position to see that than I am. But as Stephanie's been mentioning, a number of federal benefits are beginning to wind down. We don't yet have clarity on when the SNAP benefit, the food share benefit, will the expanded benefit will disappear, but it could be as early as which would mean December would still make December the first month of actually reduced benefits, if in fact the Fed or the state ends the emergency at that time. They could extend it for an additional 3-month period, and we really don't know. It might depend somewhat on what the COVID is doing. There seem to be some indications it's coming back up again, or at least in moderate numbers. Stephanie had asked me just to share some information about kind of what we're currently seeing in volume. And so what I have put together, and this is part of goes into our annual report, is it shows you on the screen that the blue line. Let's see, do we have that or not? I'm actually not. Oh, there it is, up in the corner. The blue lines are just showing the volume of food in millions of pounds from 2015, when we averaged around 12 million pounds, and you can see that between 2019, 2020, and 2021. We had, fairly, significant increases. You all are very aware because you handed all of this food out to families. And then overlaid on top of that is our participation numbers. And these are numbers that are reported by food pantries. Now, this is, and unfortunately my chart doesn't clarify that, but it is people served at the food pantries in the TEFAP network. And 2015 is when we had seen kind of our all-time high. I think it was about 218,000 persons per month at TEFAP food pantries. If you were to look at the prior 5 years that are not on the chart, you would have seen a steadily increasing demand for emergency food that began during the last recession in 2008 and rose, fairly steadily through 2015. And from 2015, we've begun to see, a decline, a fairly gradual decline in the volume. But then when the pandemic came in 2020 and 2021, because of the large number of federal resources that were available, which was really an excellent thing, the family's need for emergency food diminished somewhat. Also, at the same time, some of our pantries had stepped out or reduced hours or interrupted their service for health and safety reasons. So what you're seeing there is what our network has reported in terms of the average people served in each. This, of course, is an average that ends with last September. So for the last 10 months or so, this doesn't reflect what's been happening at local food pantries in terms of demand. but it does show you what TEFAP volume is. While 2022 isn't completely concluded in terms of our ordering, it currently looks like it's going to be about 14 million pounds. So if you just added another blue line onto the right end of that chart, you can see that our numbers are getting back into the area where we historically have been, which was around 12 to 14 million pounds annually. Obviously, it depends entirely upon what Congress allocates and what the USDA purchases in terms of bonus foods or other supplemental foods. So we have some concerns about that volume dropping at a point when families may be needing more resources. It's excellent that Feeding Wisconsin, the Hunger Task Force, have some additional resources that are coming out to the food pantries, and we'll just have to see, what that volume looks like going forward. We did have some truck cancellations. I assume Feeding Wisconsin's experiencing this also, but a lot of there are just disruptions in the supply chain, but also with some other in some other areas as well. And so we have seen some products that we had expected to have in the fourth quarter not arrive. Canned tuna, for instance, and some mixed fruit, canned mixed fruit, and some other items. We did over order in the fourth quarter. In 20 years of doing this, I've never done that. I've never intentionally overspent our money, but USDA gave us permission to do it. So we overspent around 8% to try to compensate for that approximately 8% loss that we expected. But then with some of these additional cancellations, some of that overspending was neutralized, and we're now currently about 3% overspent. There still is a good volume of food that's going out, but not at the levels that folks are used to, and possibly not at the levels that families might need. It's speculative, and I don't know what's actually going to happen. And as I say, I think you all have a better sense of what that local demand is going to look like, but that we can only order within the resources that are available to us. So that's really my the main information I wanted to share with you. We did have just the recent bonus offer of some additional products that we're picking up as well, and that's helped some going into the fourth quarter. But we'll just have to keep an eye on it. The one thing I did want to just follow up quickly, I think in an earlier meeting, someone had asked about the WIRA outreach and whether we could provide additional copies of WIRA outreach materials as we had done before. And we've had a hard time getting a clear answer from the Department of Administration. We've asked them several times actually about that and haven't gotten a clear answer. So I think what we may be able to do is simply update the materials and send it out to you, and then pantries that are interested would probably need to make their own copies of that to share with the customers that you're serving. But we have not been able, despite several efforts, have not been able to get a clear response from DOA. Some of that I think is due a little hesitancy on their part because some of the agencies have been overwhelmed with requests for assistance, and they're trying to process that and are less focused on conducting outreach. Nevertheless, it still remains a perfectly good idea to make our families aware that this resource is there. Does anybody have any questions about any of that? Good. So I'm assuming that was all totally clear and everybody got it. So, but if you have a question or anything, certainly give me a holler anytime, email or phone call. I'm more than happy to respond to questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate that update. And as Jonathan had kind of alluded to, just Feeding Wisconsin's network of food banks does have some DAC cap, ARPA dollars that are being spent both on infrastructure for pantries and food banks and on food, primarily on food. Over $10 million of the 15 is for food. And I guess similarly but differently to TEFAP, we're not seeing the same kind of cancellations on food, but we are seeing delays. So orders are taking much longer to be received. And I think the bottleneck there ends up being transportation on our end. It's been a big challenge. But we're kind of ordering with the understanding that something that we might usually receive in 2 to 3 weeks, we're getting in 6 to 8 weeks. So I think that's something we're keeping in mind as we're pacing the rest of our purchases for the remainder of the year, which is the remainder of the grant year. Those DATCAP ARPA purchased foods are flying off the order sheet. So as we put them on, I know pantries are ordering them. I think some of our food banks, this isn't consensus amongst all, but some are going to reduce the variety of food that they're purchasing with those ARPA dollars because it's just flying off the shelves. That I think we're trying to double down on some of the protein, some of the higher demand products that maybe we can keep it on the order form a little bit longer to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to receive some of that product. So that's the only update that I have on our end when it comes to those food purchases. Any other questions on food flow or food resources for now? The last update that I had to share out is that thank you to everyone for completing the monthly pantry survey, just to get some understanding of what you all want to see as part of this call. I was out with COVID, so I haven't had much time to analyze this as I wanted to, but I will drop in the chat a PDF of the results for now that Cecilia, our AmeriCorps Vista, put together. So we'll be looking a little more closely at that, and it's my hope to kind of schedule a topic for conversation for each of the following months so that you all can understand what we might be discussing, opt in or out, depending on that topic. And also, it's my hope that we can line up some speakers based on those topics. So if you take a look at that PDF, and if there's any topics of interest that you think you might have something to share on, want to do a mini presentation, maybe 5-10 minutes, I welcome you to reach out to myself or Cecilia, our AmeriCorps Vista, to start putting together that schedule of conversations at upcoming monthly meetings. Outside of that, our next call will be, again, as always, the second Thursday of the month at 11. It'll be August 11th at 11 a.m. And with that, I will open it up for any discussion. Oh, sorry, I did have one more update. There's been an ongoing question about the ability of pantries to require vaccination to participate in-person or indoor pantry distributions. And I did get an update from Jennifer Putzer at DHS on that. DHS has shared that food pantries need to reach out to their local public health departments for guidance on vaccination requirements. So DHS at TEFAP does not have a stance on that or any guidance on that. That's up for you to discuss with your local public health department. So just wanted to make sure that I did share that update since it's been an ongoing conversation. Any questions, comments, successes and challenges to share out with the group?
This is Dan from Racine. I just have a quick question relating to the new TEFAP income guidelines that apparently changed recently. I thought it was supposed to be July, but it turns out it looks like it was June. Many of our TEFAP pantries were unaware of that change. So I'm just wondering what was done to get the word out that income guidelines changed.
I can, Dan, I'll just quickly say, I thought that I saw something from Jen that it was supposed to start in August, and maybe somebody can correct me. I only saw the email just shortly before this call. Looks like DHS has made the decision, that folks may or may not know, to change the income threshold from 300 down to 200. It historically had been 185, so they're keeping it at a slightly higher rate, but clearly lower than it has been, during COVID. I'm still actually digesting that email, and I thought that the start was for October. My own feeling is I prefer that it started with the new federal fiscal year, which would be October 1. I'm not sure why they're implementing that sooner, but that will certainly be discussed. You can't put in place a policy that you don't know about. So clearly, if you're only hearing about it now, and I'm not sure what other notices may have gone out from DHS, you obviously can't implement something like that. So I think we'll just have to look and see what is the effective date. Does anybody on the call know that? Yvonne, do you know what that date is, or any other person who's doing TEFAP?
Jonathan, I was on a call yesterday with Hunger Task Force, and they had indicated that it goes into effect this month. But I was going to dig a little deeper on DHS's website because it was a surprise. I was expecting, like you were, later in the year, ideally the beginning of the federal fiscal year. So I was a little taken aback by it as well. But that's where I had learned about it, was yesterday on a Hunger Task Force call.
Yeah, now they did release new, poverty and unemployment numbers very recently, and that in turn affects the share of the food that each county receives of TEFAP. But Jen mentions on this email that we were going to discuss this at the July 28th TEFAP Advisory Council meeting, which is at the end of this month. So having not discussed it yet, to Dan's point, I'm not quite sure how you implement a policy that you haven't been fully informed of. It also requires adjusting forms and documents and so forth, and that takes time. I think, folks, if you got that email from Jen, I think I would just respond to her with your concerns or comments and let her know. I'm going to, and I'm personally going to just recommend that it be an October 1 start, which would simply make more sense and give us time to inform the folks that we're serving. There could maybe people out there that have been coming to pantries and would expect to be served and suddenly find themselves unable to be served with federal commodities. I think that would really be unfortunate, and it would seem to me it would take a little bit of customer education to make sure that situation doesn't happen. But all I know right now is what's in that email, and it talks about it being discussed in 2 weeks on the 28th.
So, Jonathan, that's my understanding too, is that it has not been reduced. The email that just came out this morning from Jen says August, and not a specific date in August. So none of the forms or anything, and I would tend to agree. I don't think the income has changed yet, and it needs to be discussed with EFOs in the state meeting, would be my understanding.
If you go on the DCTF website, though, it does say that it was changed as of yesterday. I printed it out, but this is the weird thing. The PDF that it comes up, I can show you. It says Wisconsin household income eligibility during COVID pandemic, beginning June 1st, 2020. So they're saying that they're going back to this income as of yesterday, but they haven't changed the income requirements. Do you know what I mean? They're going back to the state, but I don't know if you can see it.
I can see it, but I can't read it. Can you just do that? Just highlight that again, Lisa. What it's talking about the implementation date.
Well, if you go on the DCF website, I was looking at it, I'm like, well, this is weird because we got an email from our EFO saying, that the income guidelines have changed. So I went on there and it says as of yesterday they changed, but when you pull up the PDF for the change to print it out, perhaps to post or perhaps not, then it comes up on the top, it says June 1st, 2020. So they didn't really update their income. They're just going back to the income amounts during that time.
And Dan, I can also tell you here in Kenosha County, we have not heard anything from our CAP agency that it's been a change. What we did receive last week was an income increase table for the year. So it actually went up to like 3,300 or so for a single person. But we have not heard anything officially from our CAP agency that we need to go back to that 185 or the 200%. So we're kind of waiting on that here. And maybe he doesn't have that information yet either, just like we don't.
I'll share that I just dropped in the chat 2 links. One is to the DHS website. That does look like it was changed. As Lisa mentioned, this was 2 days ago. And it does say household income should not exceed 200%. And then I did drop the other link, I think is to the document that Lisa was mentioning. That does look like it goes back to the 2020 200% at, yeah. So it doesn't have a start date of implementation, but it does look like the website has been updated.
It's really strange because I'm holding 2 documents, one at the 300% with a start date of June 1st, 2020, and it looks like the other one at 200% with a start date of June 1st, 2020. So it's a little confusing. I think they just need to clarify.
Yeah, because my understanding, because that's about 3 or 4 months into the pandemic, that June 1st date in 2020, and if I recall, that's when we raised the income threshold to that higher level. I think it was 200% prior to that, but I think in early June that's when it went up. Clearly, there's going to have to be more communication on this, and pantries and simply need time to make the adjustments on their end. I'm just curious. I know we don't typically ask folks what is your exact income, or do we necessarily know what percent of the federal poverty level someone's income is at? We just, are you at or below this number? But do you have any sense of how many, whether you have a significant number of families that are above 200% that would be unable to be served with federal commodities after the implementing?
Jonathan, I asked my pantry staff that yesterday, how many people are going to be impacted from the 200 to 300% change. Mm-hmm. And they didn't feel it was a significant number. However, one of the things they were asking for is what do we say to people who need food now, or who are in that 300% or closer to that 300% table? So that would be my ask of you and Stephanie, like some really good wording for us when we have to start turning away a lot of people at our doors.
What level does Feeding Wisconsin use for non-TEFAP outlets? Do you have an income threshold, or is it just on demand?
Our food banks vary on that. Many don't have any income guidelines, any requirements of eligibility.
I can tell you, we just mirror whatever TEFAP's current guidelines are because it just makes things simpler for us.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do too. So we're just consistent across the board.
Same here.
The argument could be made that if you're not providing federal commodities, that you're not bound by the income limit. And that might be a possible answer for someone who is over income, is to receive non-federal resources. Now, TEFAP assumes that some private sector foods will also be provided with TEFAP, but to my knowledge, there isn't anything that would prevent a pantry from serving an individual at a higher level, as long as they knew that they could distinguish their federal commodities from non-federal, food products. This might be a point that we can discuss on the July 28th call. It's worth discussing, especially given that we have been serving some families at those levels, and they may, reasonably think that they're, should be able to continue to get services. So that might be one way to walk around that. We'll have to see what Jen thinks of that.
If you could also provide for us, if that's an opportunity, because I know it always has been for us, that if we wanted to serve people outside of those income limits, we could, just not with TEFAP food. But if we could also look with that, any kind of discrimination that may come up, oh, you're getting this food, but I'm getting that food, and just really mindful. So if you could wrap that into the dialogue to make sure we don't kind of fall in any discrimination areas.
Right. And I think that, the natural answer to that is just it's federal guidance, right? The Fed does not tell states what that income threshold needs to be, but it does require that Wisconsin implement a uniform income standard. So everyone, if we go to 200, it must be 200 everywhere. That is within the TEFAP network. But they don't dictate to us what that number needs to be. So I think the answer to that is simply, the federal, because of the state income limit and the federal rules surrounding TEFAP, were prevented from providing the federal commodities to anyone above the state approved income limit. But potentially providing other non-federal resources is would be an option, certainly. I would think so. I think we should get a clear answer on that, but it would seem reasonable to me.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but the stating their income, it's just they're signing off that they fall below whatever guidelines you show them. So I suspect that it's really not going to change the service levels at the pantry very much. If they need to sign this form to get the food and they need the food, they're going to sign it regardless of what percentage their income is versus poverty level. So I'm going to guess that wherever they set that bar, it's really not going to change service numbers dramatically, I wouldn't think.
Let's hope that's true. I think that's true. I know that historically, when we've asked people, even when we had a 185 federal poverty limit, that folks would tell us that really very few families, were at that level, and so now we're a bit higher than that even. So hopefully, it's a smaller number. I have argued with the USDA on this point that it should, couldn't it just be on demand, or couldn't individual communities set their own requirement? But they won't allow it because the federal statute, controls that has a rule that requires a uniform standard. So,
and I would just reiterate the idea that you can serve non-federal commodity food to folks that do say they're over that limit. Our food banks, and also direct folks to other distributions. So many of our food bank mobile pantries, they might have are you over or under this, just so that we can track that we are serving a majority of folks who are under poverty limits for donated product, but that always evens out. So we never turn folks away from mobile pantries or other pantries. So there are resources available one way or another. But Ellen made a good point in the chat that it's a bummer to make people feel like they have to lie to access the food that they need. So I think that is a question about, it is a federal guideline. So it's not discrimination, but it's different programs have different guidance that needs to be followed. Helen's question, just so that she's clear, there is not yet an implementation date for the new income guidelines. I think that's unclear to many. I haven't heard a confirmed implementation date. Is that correct, Jonathan?
Well, that's what as I say, I just saw the communication on it just shortly before the call, and I just have not had an opportunity to dig into that. I'll certainly give Jen a holler and try to get some clarification on it. We'll just have to see. But normally when you would roll out something like this, you would do it with significant advance warning so that people know that, and that clients and customers can be informed, and the outlets themselves can make the appropriate plan. So I'm a little surprised to see that rolled out in that manner.
So we will ask Jen to share out to EFOs some clarity on that. And if I receive any, I'll make sure to include it in the meeting notes as well. And just so you all know where those meeting notes live, they're on our Feeding Wisconsin website, and I dropped the link in the chat. Donna, would you like to share what you put in the chat?
Sure, thank you. We're currently looking for a full-time food warehouse manager. So if anyone anywhere in the state knows a candidate, send them my way. We're in the process of moving to a brand new warehouse, which is under construction. It's going to be a very state-of-the-art pantry model, and just looking for somebody who embraces all of those equitable qualities that we talk about so often. So please send them my way if you know anyone.
Thanks, Donna. Any other thoughts? Any successful practices to be shared, or any challenges to pick the brain of peers on this call?
Yes, I actually have a question. We recently had to change our distribution model. I'm sorry, I'm at the river here in Madison. We had to change our distribution model because we're in a shared space with like shared parking lot with businesses around us. And as we're still a drive-through pantry, we've had our line of cars extend past other businesses. And a new business is moving in, and our landlord has told us we can't have a line of cars anymore. Sometimes we could have up to 20 cars in line at a time, especially when we open and it's a really busy day. So what we've done, very last minute, we have a gracious neighbor who's letting us use their parking lot as like a registration site just down the road. So we're having folks register off site, maybe a 30-second drive from here, register there, and then kind of releasing cars in a timed fashion to come over and get groceries. It's, you know, it's kind of the option that we were able to come up with, and we're about 6 days into trying it. It's working kind of, but you know, it's hard because it's, you know, a volunteer offsite registering, still sending cars, you know, customers to another location. Just wondering if other pantries have had to deal with a similar situation of trying to not have a line, and trying to avoid having people schedule times to pick up. Or if anybody just has thoughts or suggestions as we try and still serve in our limited space.
Helen, I can share with you quickly. We do outdoor distribution at the neighbor's place, mainly because of COVID, but now with us moving to the warehouse, we want to continue to do this until we move. But we've had a similar issue because our lines are pretty lengthy and they go around a residential area and then past a couple businesses. And some of the businesses were pretty upset with us because our guests were blocking their driveways and creating congestion. So we were fortunate to have our local police department has a community a group of officers on bikes, and they were able to assist us with traffic congestion and flow. And we invested in some really nice signage to clearly direct people and tell them not, you know, don't park in front of these driveways and so forth. And really relying on volunteers to kind of direct traffic. But it's very challenging. So we're going to be too happy to get out of this building and out of that predicament. So I feel your pain. So that's what I can suggest. I don't know if I think of something more, I'll reach out. But we're very lucky here in Wausau to have community policing, which it does help because our lines are pretty long and it gets very congested.
Oh, well, thanks so much, Donna. Yes, we're not far from the North District police department. My husband actually was an officer there, and they've had to come over a couple times and ask us to help us get off of the street. But this is sadly our landlord is putting a restriction on us, and I get it. You know, someone's here for a business so they can be financially stable. It's just hard to continue to figure out how we can still serve people food who need it.
I know of a pantry who implemented a program where, you know, like when you go to Chili's, they give you that disc that says when this thing buzzes, then it's your turn to come. They handed everybody one of those, and they had a parking lot where everybody waited.
Okay.
And when there was space for somebody to come in, they'd tell people, okay, it's your turn. And so you'd leave the parking lot and go to the pantry. So that's another option that worked really, really well. This is a large capacity program.
Okay, thank you.
And I wonder if, you know, some of the tools that restaurants often use, where you register your name and they give them your phone link, and you get a little message on your app that says, you know, your table's ready or whatever. I wonder if simpler, I don't know if that's been tried or experimented with, but that might be another option.
Yep, I was just talking about. That's exactly what I was just talking about. Yes. And it works great for high capacity programs.
And you would get one of the little buzzers. You could just on a person's phone, if they had one, would you know, TEFAP would work in place of that.
Helen,
Sure.
do you currently have volunteers on walkie-talkie, like down at the other business, communicating back and forth?
Yes, we do.
Because yeah, you wouldn't maybe even need to buy anything. You could just use a number system, maybe. Does the other business allow folks to park there? Is that?
Yes, they're letting us use so we have we have an ice shanty down there as kind of our base. And then, I mean, we're in Wisconsin. We have an ice shanty, of course. And then we have a line established in cones and signage directing people and everything. And walkie-talkies. So we haven't, I mean, of course, you know, we had to spend things on like the signage, and we need some more. But yeah, just like, thank you for the suggestions and ideas. And yeah, we've got folks on the walkie, the volunteer and a staff on a walkie, and then checking in regularly. So we're kind of doing everything we can think of. But thank you all for the thoughts of the buzzer as well, or the app.
The other piece, I was looking at a Google map of your place, and I don't know if I'm looking at the exact place, but do you have actual parking lot lines where you could queue people in stalls and do a number system, as opposed to having them line up and going from one place to the next?
Yeah, so we actually are parking here. We share it with part of our building is a bread company. It's a depot for them. And so as staff and volunteers, we don't even have parking. We end up parking on the street because we only have about 7 or 8 spaces total. And the bread company, they start, you know, at 3 a.m. So they get there quickest. They get all the parking.
Got it.
Well, I'll put my email in the chat. I really appreciate the feedback and thoughts here. If anybody has any other thoughts on this, I'd be very open and appreciate hearing them. That makes sense. Thanks, Kathy.
Helen, I think that might be a typo in your email. I think it's River Food Pantry, not Fiverr. Just looks like a typo.
I'll share that in the notes as well for folks to connect. Helen, I will say that I've seen a lot. I'm based in Madison. I've seen a lot of social media posts get exchanged on various groups of your new process. So the word has been spreading, and it seems like people were interested to share how that would go. Any other successes, challenges, or questions? Last call. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining the call today, and I'll post those notes and the recording for folks who might want to refer back to it or who weren't able to make it. But I appreciate your thoughts, suggestions, great questions. I always learn something new every meeting. And we will work to get some kind of schedule of some topics and maybe try to position some speakers who are working on some of those topics. Oh, I see Liz has her hand raised. Go ahead, Liz. Go ahead, Liz. Are you unmuted? Liz Seefeld, are you there? Oh, I can't hear you. Nope, it does look like you are unmuted, though. We did have a conversation about TEFAP income eligibility changes that are coming. There was a big question about what the date of implementation would be, and we are uncertain on that. So I think more to come, and yes, you can refer to those notes. I'll have them posted very shortly after the call today. Okay, any other thoughts? Thanks again to you all for all that you do to serve your communities, and thanks to Jonathan for the update. Liz is saying that implementation of August 1st is what she heard from Jennifer. We'll circle back on that. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Take good care. Appreciate you all.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.